Listen guys, I couldn't help it. I had to turn on the fan. It was too warm in here. So if you hear the fan, no you don't. Good morning everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I am so glad you're here. We have a few new faces. This channel was able to hit 300 subscribers since I talked to you last, which is mind-blowing. That's so cool. Thank you guys so much. If you've never seen one of my full-length videos, hi, I'm Cam. Nice to have you here. And the last time since we talked, one of my videos has gotten a ton of comments. It's my literary fiction video that I think I'm gonna put over here. I'm getting such good comments. I'm getting so many good perspectives, and I thank you guys so much. But there was one that caught my eye that I want to discuss with you guys today. I'll go ahead and read it for you. This user says, as an author of adult fiction, I wrestle with the issue of triggers. Although most of my novels deal with paranormal mystery, they are set in the real world. No monsters, other than the humankind. If a story calls for some kind of violence or other triggering content, how should we balance what is good for the story versus what is good for the reader? For adult fiction, I tend to lean towards the former, but want to be cognizant of the impact on the unsuspecting reader. A video on this dilemma would be useful. Thank you so much for your comment. I read that and I was like, that is a brilliant idea for a video, so here we are today. Today we are going to be discussing how considerate of your audience should you be, is probably the best way to frame that. Should story take priority over audience, or should audience take priority over story? So, let me start off first with the fact that I am a reader only. I am not an author. I'm glad you guys could come to this video, but if you are looking for writing advice or anything like that, I really don't have anything for you. I have some suggestions probably towards the end of the video of how I think you can be, if you are a writer, how I think authors can be more considerate of their audiences, but I myself am not a writer, so I can't speak to how to write that or anything. But what I can do is give you the perspective of someone who reads quite a lot and has a very clear idea of what I believe to be a lot and not enough. So, let's start off with this comment's first discussion, which was triggers. So, trigger or content warnings are a statement at the start of a piece of writing, film, etc., alerting the reader or viewer to the fact that it contains potentially distressing material. Now, I know a lot of people internet culture has kind of blown that a little out of proportion with all those like I'm triggered memes and stuff like that. That's kind of not what we're talking about today, but it is a way to be aware of what information you are presenting to your audience without them being caught totally off guard. In spirit of that, I wanted to discuss some works that have definitely burned me. Maybe I wasn't the proper audience for. But before we do that, obviously there is kind of a symbiotic relationship between an author and audience. Obviously, authors want people to read their works, as does every kind of content creator, whether you create content on the internet or you make movies or you make TV or you write books. Like, everyone wants people to consume the work that they're obviously putting a lot of effort into. So there is a certain level, of course that commenter was correct, that you do have to be considerate of your audience. You don't want to make it too like this if your audience doesn't like that, or too like that. I think authors that already have several published works and or an established audience and or series writers have a lot easier time determining this, because they kind of already have that pre-established audience. Okay, here's what I know audiences like. Obviously, the audience of Stephen King, for instance, is going to be a lot more okay with gore and gruesomeness and all sorts of things like that, while the audience of Rick Riordan, the author of Percy Jackson, is not gonna be into that. And obviously I use two very different authors. They write very different things. Stephen King is primarily a horror adult author, while Rick Riordan is primarily a children's adventure author. But you see what I mean. Like, there is a certain aspect of, you have to figure out who you're presenting this to. Let's talk about some of the books that I have attempted to read in the last year and why they turned me off. The very first one was my only DNF of 2023. And I should also establish this. Just because these works were not for me does not mean they are not good or valuable works of literature. They just totally weren't for me. This is the only one that I DNF'd last year. And it's this. I so wanted to like this book because I was like, ooh, a fantasy based on African folklore. I want to learn more about that. I want to understand more of that. And it just was too dark. There were some incredibly dark scenes. I made it through 200 pages of it, I think, out of 600. And in this video, I'm not going to get into, like, deep into any trigger warnings, so please don't be concerned about that. There was just so much graphic violence that I was like, ooh, this, no, this isn't for me. Now, that being said, if you liked this book, absolutely no knocks to you. You're clearly a tougher audience than I am. It just wasn't for me, and I went into this not knowing anything about the author or anything like that, so definitely a part of it was on me. I am not this author's regular audience. He writes a lot of black fantasy books and a lot of black historical fiction. So, I'm clearly not his intended audience. Another one that you guys might get on me in the comments for. I'm sorry. I do think it is a valuable piece of literature. I actually really enjoyed what it was trying to satirize and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it was just a little too bloody for me, which is another thing. I really liked the movie adaptation of this book. Oh, by the way, American Psycho. I love the movie adaptation of this book. I think it's really well done. But if you've seen the movie and haven't read the book, you may or may not be shocked to find this out. The movie tones down a lot of the violence of this book. There is a section where he very brutally kills a dog. Ugh, and it made me so upset. I had to put the book down because I was like, what? But this book is absolutely one that I would say did need that in its storytelling, which is another part we're kind of talking about. Should you have to negotiate between what is a valuable part of a story for a potential audience that you might have? And I think that Bret Easton Ellis, this was required for this book. I mean, he is satirizing a very specific type of man in the 90s. And I think he did a great job portraying it. And I would say it's probably accurate for these type of men. But at the end of the day, it was just a little too much for me. And I think I was very likely part of his intended audience to be aware of, or to be one of the people who's like, oh yeah, this is definitely satirizing something. Let's talk about another book that I actually enjoyed pretty well, even with an obscene kind of amount of content warnings involved. And no spoilers for this bad boy. But this is the notorious sad book in modern times. This literary fiction is one of my big genres. It's a genre I enjoy reading. It's a genre I can completely get down with, even with dark stuff. A lot of the books I have on display up here are actually super dark. But this is one that I can completely see, because of no warning, pretty much, that I can completely see being triggering for a lot of people. And I think this book is genuinely a work of art. I really appreciate that the author really wanted to stick to her guns about the story she wanted to tell. It just got to be too much at times. I found myself getting, for lack of a better word, triggered by things I've never gone through because of how incredible the writing of this book is. If you can handle really dark stuff, I actually really recommend this book. So, commenter, I commend you for wanting to be cognizant of what you are putting out for the reader. Like, I genuinely am really impressed by that. I think a lot of authors don't necessarily consider that. So really want to commend you for that. I'm so glad that you want to create a piece of art that people can consume without all of them being driven away by how uncomfortable it is. And with kind of paranormal suspense, that is hard to do. I think a lot of the times genre does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of, like, if you look at a book or if you go to a bookstore and you see something's in the horror section and you know you're not really a horror reader, that'll do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. One of the beautiful parts about literature is it gives you fresh perspectives on different things. So you can read a book about a foster child and learn more about this person. Last month I read a lot of Black literature for Black History Month, and it opened my eyes to things I've never noticed because of my privilege. One of the beauties of literature is you get to experience things that maybe you wouldn't experience in real life just through reading. So there is also a discussion, and this person commented this under my media literacy video, keep in mind. But there's kind of a culture going on right now of, a lot of my commenters refer to it as Puritans, people who want to have very black and white, here's what's right, here's what's wrong in their literature, and don't want to confront a lot of really, really heavy things, which that is your choice. Let me be very clear. Even if I don't necessarily agree with it, if all you want to do is read juvenile fiction and romance, that is completely your choice. Like, I encourage you to keep reading no matter what you are reading, so that is definitely your choice. That being said, a lot of my favorite literature has to have challenges, has to have things that maybe I don't agree with. Like, I think we should, as readers, be challenging ourselves to read perspectives that we are unfamiliar of. We should be reading about characters who are pretty morally great characters to help us determine what's right and what's wrong. Or we can at least observe things from a lens of, this is fiction. Like, these characters are not going to hurt you. So, I, as a reader, who admittedly reads some dark things, I personally believe that there are aspects of a story that are wildly, wildly important to the story. Let's take a classic. Let's take everybody's favorite, okay. Let's take everybody's favorite classic, The Brick, Les Mis. Two of the integral parts of The Brick are the fact that Jean Valjean, the main protagonist, is a thief. And the mother of his adopted daughter, Fantine, is a prostitute. Those are integral parts. Is that gruesome? Absolutely, especially when you go into detail about how Fantine gets a disease from one of her clients and ends up dying pretty painfully after having to get all of her hair cut off and all of her teeth pulled out just to try and make some money for her daughter. That's an insane thing to write. I know the Parisians, when Victor Hugo dropped this monster, look how big that guy is. I know when Victor Hugo dropped that monster, his audiences were scandalized. Victor Hugo was a notorious brothel patron, so he wasn't necessarily uncomfortable by that, but I'm sure public society was shocked that he decided to make one of the main integral characters of his story like that. But I think it's so valuable and so required to the plot that I never would have wanted him to compromise that. Now, I don't know the publishing scene of 1800s France, but I know that compromising that would have wildly changed this book. Like, indescribable what it would have changed. I do think there is an aspect that I do think you should stick to your guns. And you should write what you want to write and what you feel is important. That being said, I don't think it needs to be too much. Let's talk thrillers and, like, murder mystery stories. You have to have murder in that. And you can have multiple murders, but what I don't want to hear about is the detailed ways that murderer did this or this or this or this. Like, I don't think you need to have half the book be the person committing the murder. I think there is a balance of how much do you want to put in the story, because a lot of that is really going to throw off pacing. It might throw off story. It might throw off some of the other stuff you've been leading up to. If you just take like a middle break in the story just to be like, oh, here's 300 pages of murder. You know what I mean? So I do think there is a level of finding out what is too much. And I'll talk about a way that can be defended against. And I really think that when you're first publishing, if you're publishing your first book, you are going to find that a lot of that stuff is going to be weeded out by publishers. They're going to be like, oh, I don't necessarily feel like this is appropriate. But we also kind of get into the crazy side of if you're writing a story, maybe. Or if you are a best-selling author that everyone knows your works for. I mean, like I said, let's go back to Stephen King. People generally know what to expect from him because he's a household name. Several of his books have been made into movie adaptations. Most of his books are like chart-topping, like, and he's very well known in his community of horror authors. So I do think there is a certain, if he decided to go ahead and write a romance book, I can't even imagine that, by the way, but if Stephen King decided to go and write a romance book, that would alienate a lot of his audience who knows him for writing his horror, or his thriller, or his suspense stories. So I do think there's an aspect of, if you're a well-known author, you generally know your audience pretty well. You know what sells, you know what doesn't. Or if you're writing a series. I think it was George R.R. Martin said that his wife would leave him if he killed her specific character. And I know that's like a drastic thing, but he's clearly got to listen to his audience, his wife, to know not to kill that character if he doesn't want his wife to divorce him. You know what I mean? But I do think there is a certain level of sometimes authors see the responses to what their audience thinks about the first book in a series and goes, maybe I might change my plans according to how my audience is reacting. We see that in TV shows all the time. I know this isn't really a TV show account, but we see like TV show writers like will write a character out because they're done with them. Then audiences will be like, where did that character go? And they eventually have to write them back in, you know? And I think it's a kind of a different beast with writing, because writing I would think takes longer than TV production. But, you know, I once again speak from the perspective as a reader and not a writer. I do think there is a certain level of be considerate of what audience you're trying to get. If you are trying to get an audience like Stephen King has, great. Then you can generally look at his works and know, oh, I want this. Or if you're trying to get an audience like, I almost said Tolkien, but I think Tolkien enthusiasts are kind of different. They're built different. They learn like entire languages. That's crazy. Or if you know that you want an audience like Neil Gaiman's, that opens up a lot of opportunity. My general belief on the balance is I think that you should go for whatever you feel the story requires without making too much of it, or feeling so strictly about everything in your story that you're like, none of this can change. You have to be open to change. But you gotta keep in mind, I am a reader who likes reading dark stuff. So, you know, I might be your targeted audience. You never know. For my author friends, and any fellow readers can comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think authors should do to kind of be aware of their audience and how they should approach content warnings. Please comment down below. I am interested in hearing what you guys have to say, and I am also interested in if I have any authors who watch this video, what you all think about this. I think I have 3 recommendations for you, dear commenter, and anybody else who might ever consider writing something and trying to get it published, you know what I mean? So, what I would recommend sticking to what you feel is right for the story. And like I said, without doing too much. If you feel like a really gruesome murder, for instance, if you feel like a really gruesome murder is absolutely required for your story, like it's an integral storytelling part, then include it. But don't make the murder scene a fourth of the book. I have seen several trigger warnings in my books. Let me find one. I think I have a book that has like a really good trigger warning page. I generally recommend using trigger warnings or content warnings. And I know a lot of authors feel like, oh, this is going to spoil the context of my story and what's going to happen and stuff like that. And I can totally understand that frustration. I think, here it is. Oh, the book is This Delicious Death by Kayla Cottingham. But she essentially just lists out the topics that are going to be discussed, and she doesn't do it in any detail. It's enough that, yes, I know this is going to appear in this book, but it's not going to affect my reading experience. I don't think I've ever been bothered by content warnings at the start of a story. In fact, most of the time I've appreciated it because it's not going to jump scare me so bad that I have to like put down the book, you know what I mean? And once again, readers, comment down below if you've ever had an issue or you've really enjoyed content warnings, because I'm sure this will be helpful for this person. But yeah, I don't think it has ever taken me out of the story. Now, every reader is different, of course. And I'm sure if an author really wanted to, they could put a page at the beginning and say, check content warnings at my website, or whatever you want to do to avoid spoilers. I think there is a way around it that you can do it without feeling like you've ruined the integrity of your book or anything like that. We've got stick to your guns, but don't do too much. And then we've got, I generally would recommend utilizing content warnings. And then the final one that I would say is get some eyes on your work. Honestly, if you want to know how to not alienate your audience, have a few people read your work. Have members of your intended audience. So if an author friend of mine came to me and was like, hey, I'm writing this literary fiction. Will you read over it for me and give me some thoughts? I would be happy to do that because I'm a big lit fic person. So get some eyes on it. I know there is a certain aspect to wanting to keep it close to your chest, but I don't really think that sensitivity readers, for instance, are a bad things, or just enjoyers of the genre that you're going for. If you just want them to get an eye on it, that would be probably the greatest way to say, how is my work coming across to my intended audience? I know that was super rambly. I know it wasn't as well researched as my media literacy video, but you know, I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts about the situation. Thank you so much to that commenter. The reason I've been referring to you as that commenter the whole time is because I cannot remember your handle for the life of me, so I'll put it up on screen if I find it. Thank you so much for commenting that. I loved the video idea, and thank you for letting me just ramble at you. And for those of you who are not that commenter, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts down below, whether you are an author or just a reader / enjoyer like I am, because I really want to know everyone's perspective on this. This is just my perspective as a reader only. But yeah, that is all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment down below, subscribe, ring the notification bell to see when I post. I post shorts 5+ times a week, and I post a full video every Sunday. Check me out on the Clock app, even though it might be getting banned soon. But check me out on TikTok at CamBird. Check me out on Instagram at birdsbooks or at CamBird. I've seen a few of you following those accounts, so I've got my eye on you. Go read a book that challenges you. If it's warming up near you or cooling down or just the weather's getting more comfortable, go outside and go visit your local library.